Welcome to Brevis Talk. The talks you are about to hear will be honest, revealing, and unfiltered. Join us as your host, Pastor Wayne Whiteside, lifts the lid of silence and has conversations about mental illness and health in the church. The goal here is simple. It is to help someone along this journey of life who is struggling. It is to tell the truth to the unsuspecting. And it is to lighten the load of a fellow traveler. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to serve as medical advice or to replace consultation with your physician or mental health professional. If you are experiencing a medical crisis, call 911 or go to the nearest emergency room. Now, here's your host, Pastor Wayne.
You have found yourself at another Brevis Talk, where we go into the penitentiaries and I share with you stories from yesteryear, either on death row, been to death row in 5 different states, maximum security prisons, and then local jails. I do need to warn you today about the broadcast. It is very, very descriptive and will be very disturbing and certainly is not suitable for many to tune into. So please be forewarned. Danny Paul Bible is as vile and evil a person that has ever drawn breath, said Larry Lance, whose sister was murdered by Bible in 1983. We're glad to have witnessed him draw his last breath. I know that he will burn in hell for eternity. It had been almost 40 years ago when the brutalized body of 20-year-old Inez Deaton was found in a field near a deserted car wash in Harris County. She had been raped and repeatedly stabbed with an ice pick in May 1979. And for about 2 decades, her murder went unsolved. Then in 1998, Danny Bible was arrested in Louisiana in another rape case where he confessed during police interrogations to that rape as well as Deaton's murder, according to court records. And from then he was dubbed the Ice Pick Killer. Wednesday evening, June 27th, 2008, Bible, a 66-year-old Texas death row inmate, was put to death for Deaton's murder. He uttered no final words. The lethal injection began at 6:17 p.m., and Bible was pronounced deceased at 6:32 p.m. The Houston Chronicle reported that Bible, who had IVs inserted into his hands instead of the crook of his arm, as usual, trembled from Parkinson's disease and muttered "burning" and "it hurts" before falling silent and losing consciousness. Bible and his attorneys had fought his execution, in part by claiming that he was too sick to be put to death by lethal injection, that his veins were too weak, and he would likely choke laying on the back of the gurney. Bible suffered from multiple heart and lung conditions, as well as from Parkinson's disease. They argued that since courts require inmates to propose an alternative when generally challenging a state's execution method, Texas could consider killing him using a firing squad or nitrogen gas. Because of his poor health, Mr. Bible has severely compromised peripheral veins, meaning it will be difficult, if not impossible, to establish 2 functioning IVs in his veins, creating a substantial risk of either a botched execution or an aborted execution attempt, wrote one of Bible's attorneys, Jeremy Shepers, in his appeal to the 5th U.S. Circuit Court. Bible also argued that he should be granted a new punishment trial when jurors decide on issues that would lead to a death sentence or one of life in prison after finding the person guilty of capital murder after a prison van accident left him disabled. Being transferred from the county jail to death row after being convicted and sentenced to death in 2003, the prison van carrying Bible was in a head-on collision, according to court reports. The drivers of both vehicles were killed, and Bible was severely injured, leaving him unable to walk without assistance. In the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, he argued that because of this accident and his disability, jurors may not have deemed Bible a future danger, despite his lengthy criminal background. To sentence someone to death in Texas, jurors must unanimously agree that a capital murder convict is a future danger. And it was in 1998 a confession to a West Baton Rouge Parish sheriff's detective that Bible said that Deaton had walked into his uncle's house in 1979 where he was staying, and he raped her. And then he stabbed her to death with an ice pick, put her body in a garbage bag, and dumped her in a field. She was a friend of his cousin and the mother of a toddler. He fled Texas when the young mother's body was discovered, and it was not until 1998 that this murder was solved. This case was solved, and they actually knew who the killer was. It's an interesting thing when you consider a serial killer. They don't think like we do, friend. I've spoken to numerous serial killers over the years. Some were under sentence of death, while others were serving multiple life sentences. I'm always asked this question: what does a serial killer look like? Well, the quick answer is they don't have a logo on their foreheads to identify them. They look like you. They look like me. They're young. They're not so young. They're Caucasian. They're African American. They come from poor backgrounds. They come from wealthy backgrounds. Some are very educated. Some are uneducated. So there's not a serial killer look. They are humans who have tremendous evil within them. Palo Pinto County Sheriff Larry Watson, who investigated the North Texas murders, told KXAS-TV that Mr. Bible is your typical serial killer. The family views are across the board concerning Danny Bible. His sister, Kathy Mabels, told Houston Television, KPRC, that she thinks her brother is innocent. I feel my brother did not commit any crime. He didn't do anything wrong. I know in my heart that he didn't. And yet his cousin, Winona Bible, who was friends with Miss Deaton, said her friend was last reported seen alive after going to her grandmother's house to use the phone. Mr. Bible was there, and she said she's always suspected him. She said, I remember that day like it was yesterday. Over the next 2 decades, court reports show Bible beat and raped women and girls in Montana and Louisiana. In North Texas, he murdered his sister-in-law, her baby son, and her roommate, all on the same day in 1983. After a stint in prison, he received a 25-year sentence there, served less than 9 years, and he was released. And then it was in 1998 that he was captured in Florida, that he began to admit and confess many of his crimes. He was called the worst of the worst by Josh Rice, a Harris County Assistant District Attorney. And I quote from Mr. Rice, he killed at least 4 people that we know of. One of them is a young child. He used an ice pick to kill some victims. He raped at least 6 or 7 women. I've got a list in front of me, and I'm sure it's not complete, of all the victims. This trail of evil, this trail of destruction that he left, it is overwhelming. You have Inez Deaton. You have the sister-in-law, her sister, and the 4-month-old. Let's see here. You've got Pamela Hudgens. Then you've got Tracy Powers, the sister-in-law, and her 4-month-old son, Justin. And their skeletal remains were found the following month. They were found hidden beneath a cattle guard about halfway between Mineral Wells and Weatherford, Texas. Their cause of death was not determined. Ms. Hudgens' body was found in a wooded area in Mineral Wells that November of that year, 83, and she suffered trauma to the head. He was arrested in January 1984 in Fort Myers, Florida. He pled guilty again to the Hudgens murder, and was sentenced 25 years, and he served less than 9. And he was picked up from Florida, from Louisiana, far Louisiana. He he forced his way into a lady's motel room, bound her and raped her, and then tried to put her into a plastic bag, but she wouldn't fit, according to her, and he eventually left her. And the sheriff's detective of Louisiana questioned him and asked, "What would you have done if she had fit into that bag?" And he says, and it was like a light bulb was turned on. He stared at me for probably 10 minutes, and then he said, "I tell you what, get me a pack of cigarettes and a Bible, and I'll talk to y'all tomorrow." And then he goes on to say that Bible did, in fact, talk. He went over the 4 killings thoroughly, confessed to each one, including the ones he had served time for. And the detective would go on to say, "I think we're going to get more in the long run. And once the Texas cases are settled," the detective says, "I want a psychologist with expertise in criminal profiling to interview Bible." Bible also confessed to raping 2 adult stepdaughters, and family members have not heard from one of the daughters and ex-wives, and the detective says that authorities are trying to locate them. He said, "We'd like to make sure they're alive." End of quote from the deputy detective. I met Danny Bible when he was toward the end of his life. The first time I remember seeing him, he was in a wheelchair, overweight, tremors in both hands, the result of that terrible wreck that claimed 2 lives. The inmates called him Speedy, and that was because of his being wheelchair bound. We talked, we visited. He told me that he had lived and worked in as much as 20 different states. And he also told me that he was very proud, over and over I heard stories about this, he was very proud that he knew how to survive in the woods, how to trap, what plants to eat, and et cetera, et cetera. I remember one day a very disturbing thing that he said. It was disturbing to me, and I remember it quite well. He was talking about an animal caught in a trap. He said, most people will shoot them because they're afraid to get up close. He said, "I use a knife because I'm not afraid." And that was just really eerie. And at least in my mind, it was sort of an undercurrent there, simply saying I enjoy hurting something up close. And it was very troubling because he seemed to be pretty pleased when he gave me that story. He was smiling and seemed pretty upbeat about that. If you read a description of Danny Bible, it'll tell you his height, his weight, etc. Blue eyes. That's all the description says. But let me add to that. He had piercing blue eyes. I don't mean to say they were blue. Blue doesn't adequately describe them. I would liken them unto a hawk or a falcon's eyes, a bird of prey. They were sharp. They were intense. Just hard to explain, but it's almost like there was fire in them. And he's an old man here. He's shaking with Parkinson's disease. He's bound to a wheelchair, but there seemed to be a fire burning still within the collapsed and limited body, the broken body. There certainly seemed to be a fire. At least I had that idea that perhaps he might not be dangerous because he was wheelchair bound, but a different person lived on the inside than the one you saw with your eyes concerning the external. At least that's just my opinion. I have no doubt that there were more victims. The timeline of his known victims has several years of separation. There's this long, long gap in the middle where that there are no murders, there are no crimes, and you'll never convince me that he took a sabbatical, that he killed, and he stopped, and he was hibernating or lying dormant, and then all of a sudden he began to kill. I do believe there were multitude of victims that we don't know about, that he chose not to speak about, and we'll never know. We'll absolutely never know this side of eternity. I would press him about victims. I would ask him, are there more victims? I said, if so, it would help families if they knew what happened to their loved ones. Every time I did that, he would change the subject. He would look away, and then he would change the subject. So we never had any communication, valuable communication concerning that subject matter. Before his execution, we talked about a possible final statement. I go through, if I'm with a man and I'm declared his spiritual advisor, he desires that I be his spiritual advisor, I always like to talk with him about a final statement. First of all, are you going to make one? Secondly, if you make one, what are you going to say? And I encourage them, don't say anything stupid. If the inmate has family or children, they're going to read that about you, and that'll be the last thing they know about you. Be respectful, and don't cause any more pain. The victims' families, they've hurt. Don't bash them. Don't strike out at them, but be respectful. And especially, I would always say, don't lie. You don't want a lie on your lips to be the last thing on this planet that you said, and then you're facing God and final judgment. So you don't want to leave with a lie on your lips. And so we talked about a final statement and had some conversation about that. I suggested in this particular case that he not make a final statement because I thought at this point anything he said would probably be misinterpreted and possibly just cause more pain for the victims' families and his family. And so I suggested he not make a final statement. Of course, that's left up to him. And he did not make a final statement. We were aware there would be several witnesses for the representing the victims, their family, perhaps some friends, and that they were there and they were hurting, angry people. And so, don't say anything. That's what at least I advised, and he did not. That afternoon, before he was executed, I spent time with him that afternoon. That morning, actually, spent 2 days in and out, 8 hours there. The 2 days previous to his execution, I wasn't the only visitor, but I was the primary one, and probably spent at least 4 hours each day, the 2 days before the execution. That morning I spoke with him, and then I was with him that afternoon, just an hour or so before he was executed. He's very hard to read. Of course, he was always a closed book who would occasionally open up and show you just a little bit. I did observe that afternoon that he was nervous, not any more nervous than some. Some are very, very nervous. I wouldn't call him being in a panic by any means, but he was nervous. And there were still some appeals pending. His attorneys were trying to get a stay of execution and also to get back into the court and argue some other, option that he might have. And he believed that they would fail and he would be executed. He had resigned himself that he would be executed. And I believe it 6 o'clock execution is when an execution can begin. The Supreme Court did not reject that last appeal till somewhere around 5:30, 5:35. So almost up to the point of when he could legally be executed, they had not made a decision. Of course, that was before the 6 o'clock space and time. I've been over the waiting in this room they put us in, not knowing whether an execution would go forth, and they could execute at 6, and the court still has they still have appeals pending, and I've waited till as long as 10:30 in the evening before the court either said they stopped it, the execution cannot go forward, or they said the execution can go forward. I especially remember one inmate. It was a little after 10:30 when the escorts came and got us and walked us into the prison and then into the death chamber observation room or viewing room. And so I've been over there when the warrant expired. Execution time can after 6 p.m., but after midnight or at midnight, the execution warrant expires, and they would have to get another date set. But he didn't believe that it would go and have success. His lawyers would have success. Now, the question is that people ask me about these inmates, do you believe they were really Christians, or were they not Christians, or did they reject God all the way, or did they have thoughts about it? And no one knows what's in someone's heart. I certainly don't know what's in another man's heart, and I don't pretend to know. And so let me be frank and honest and open. I don't have any idea what was in his heart regarding salvation and the Lord's offer of forgiveness and pardon for his sins. He told me more than once that he knew the Lord and that he was okay concerning the next life. He really never wanted to talk about the Lord. He didn't have really anything to say about the Lord. I never heard him say that he was rejoicing or praising God for his goodness and his forgiveness, and not something there. I shared a lot about the Lord. I read from Scripture, and he quietly sat by. So I have no idea what was in his heart. He mostly wanted to talk about traveling the country and living in the woods off of the land. And he was definitely very, very well versed in living off the land. He could speak hour upon hour about what was edible, how to trap, hunt, and that is the subject matter that he preferred to talk about. I look at all of these executions, especially the ones I am concerned about and not sure in my heart, I don't feel really 100% good about their salvation, and I ask myself, did I say everything I needed to say? Was I clear enough in what I needed to say? And did I have the zeal that I should have had when I presented the gospel? And I come to this conclusion about Danny Paul Bible. I do know that he heard the gospel. He heard the story of the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Christ. I know he heard it. I believe with my heart it was presented in a very clear way, not just by me, but by some other individuals, volunteers. We did talk about sin, made it very clear that the only means of forgiveness for sin is Jesus Christ. There's no other way. Being good is not enough. Keeping the law is not enough. A sacrament or ritual of water baptism or the Lord's Supper, that alone is not good enough. That you must go by way of Jesus Christ, that he spilt his blood and died in our place, and numerous times shared the gospel and shared my testimony, my salvation testimony about God's love and grace in my life and his patience in my life. And he sat there, he listened. I know he didn't interrupt, he didn't argue. So I know he heard the message. I have no idea what he received, what he thought, what he felt like, if he actually had repented, turned from his sin, and had turned to Christ. I just don't know. He was not an open book. You got glimpses every once in a while. He would show something. I do feel like the great motivator in most of our visits is that I was the only showing for him. He had no visitors really. He occasionally would get a family visit, and I believe that perhaps that in the early days that was perhaps his parents that I saw there. Very, very elderly couple, and they had trouble getting there. And I don't really know that, but I believe it was. But he did not get very many visits, and so loneliness. I think he listened a lot of times to me and visited. I think he was appreciative of the visits. I think I broke up the loneliness and sort of put a gap in a day when I was there, because every day is the same with an inmate who is in solitary confinement. Every day, it's probably in my mind, the harshest thing about prison life and solitary confinement is just how the fact that every day is the same. Every day is just like the day before, and the day coming is going to be like the same, and it is just boredom on steroids. It's a terrible existence that a person is, within concrete, and concrete is their conversation piece. And so I think that he was greatly appreciative that I was able to come and sit with him and visit and break up the day. Here's something interesting I just thought about that might be of an interest to you. Over the years, I have met inmates who were in solitary confinement and did not have any real human conversation, and then I visited with them, and they really have trouble having a conversation. It's almost as if they forget words. Their vocabulary has shrunk, and just the process of thinking and then it coming out of your lips. I won't say they stutter, but they stagger. They are it's very difficult for them to get out what they are thinking. And I've seen many of them, it seems like they were searching for the word. And so I suppose that speech and conversation, if it's not practiced, if it doesn't happen on a regular basis, I guess it is something that can be lost or diminished. But I have noticed this in more than one person over the years, and I've always been a bit intrigued by that and have noticed it over the years as something that's a factor you see many, many times. Well, that's the story of Danny Paul Bible, the ice pick killer. And I want to remind you that if you do not know Jesus Christ, that there is no other way to heaven. Christ said when the disciples asked where was he going, and he said, well, I'm the way, the truth, the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. And that is in Holy Scripture, John chapter 14, verse 6. Paul told Timothy, there is one mediator between God and man, the man, Christ Jesus. So let's be very, very clear. Jesus Christ is the way to heaven. He's not a good way. He's not the best way. He is the only way. God bless you. Thank you for stopping by. We will talk again soon.
And that concludes our broadcast today. Please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Plus, check us out at our Facebook page or at brevistalk.com and take a look at our blog. And remember, be kind. Always be kind.